Sure, absolutely. So going back to September, October of last year, obviously there was a lot of discussion, a lot of political debate, actually, with the campaigns. And, there was a question as to whether or not the candidates knew how bad things were. And do you have any opinion about that at all in terms of, could anybody project that, reasonably project that the economy, Louisiana economy in terms of revenues would be as bad? The governor said that it has worsened by a factor of 2, meaning doubled in terms of worsening.
Well,
your thoughts?
I can't tell you exactly what each of the candidates thought, but I do know that I talked to each of them. They were very attentive. All of them certainly had been clued in that if they won the governorship, their first order of business would be to deal with the budget.
Sure.
Now, if it was $2 billion next year or only $1.6 billion or only $1.2 billion, it was still a big number. And I think they all understood that. Now, as the campaign went on, that didn't become the focal point of the campaign at all, to a certain extent, because they all knew that was the issue. It was not a debate. It was not, one could not say there's no budget crisis. They all had to agree. They had to accept the fact there was going to be a budget issue. Regardless of who's elected governor, there was going to be a special session because they had to have one. Now, maybe they would have done a few things differently. That's different. That's a different issue there. But I think they all knew that there was going to be a budget problem. And perhaps it was certainly in October when they were running, they didn't expect the price of oil to be $30 a barrel. But they knew it was going to be lower than $60 a barrel, much lower than that. So from that angle, no, I think that was well known. But because as the campaign progressed, and since they all agreed to a certain extent, silently, that there's going to be a budget problem, they didn't put that at the top. That was not the differentiating factor of who was going to win the governor's race then. So, and I guess as a practical matter, as a politician, why talk about something bad like that when it probably won't win you any votes?
Sure.
At that time.
Sure, absolutely. Greg Albrecht had said that in November and December that Greg Albrecht is, of course, the chief economist for the legislature. That in terms of December or November, nobody would have known that at that time that there would have been a $750 million budget deficit for this year, current year, and a $1.9 billion for next fiscal year, in part because you didn't know what the general administration was doing in terms of expenditures.
Well, you had a couple of things. You knew for a fact that even after the budget was passed in last year, you knew on July the 2nd of 2015 that there was about a $600 to $650 million problem for the next year because they used essentially one-time money, or they used money from different sources that were not going to be there again. So you automatically knew there was a $600 million problem, which ended by today's standard, $1.9 billion. It sounds like, oh, it's no big deal.
Sure.
But $600 million, it's still $600 million. And then we said they made forecast. They made forecast because back in the 2015 session, they raised taxes, despite what perhaps the general administration called it. They raised taxes. And they raised taxes in such a way that it was very difficult to anticipate exactly how much money those tax increases would mean, because they were dealing with credits and exemptions. And as you deal with that, you have to also deal with the fact that taxpayers respond to tax changes, And we had no history of what might happen if we played around with these at all. And that's what they really did. So we had about $750 million of forecasted money based on honestly derived numbers. The Revenue Department did its best to give information to the economists for the division, Mr. Dix, and Greg Albrecht, the economist for the fiscal office. And they put together what would be termed the most prudent estimates they could based on that information. So we were unaware. Those are very soft numbers to start with too. And then you had the economy itself, at least the Louisiana economy, not so much the national economy, the Louisiana economy was going into one of its problems. Energy prices fall. We are an energy connected state. It has an eventual impact on other businesses. It has an impact. It has a ripple effect. And that's showing up. I mean, right now you look over in Lafayette, you look at Houma and Thibodaux, you see signs, very clear signs, that those economies have kind of buckled a little bit.
Are we in a recession?
A recession for the state, but certainly in certain areas they have recessionary tendencies, yes. And I think you're finding that in the area that grew the most and in the area that's going to obviously decline the most. And that's in your just south of I-10 between Baton Rouge and Lake Charles. That's the Lafayette, that's Thibodaux, that's those areas there. So that's where it's going to happen. And
sure.
So we'll see that occur. It doesn't now. You go other places. You go to Lake Charles. You see a little different story because they are essentially a petrochemical industry, and that because they prosper because of low oil prices, whereas Lafayette, which is more production, they decline because of low oil prices. So it's a world that's kind of mixed up.
Sure.
We have that going on. So none of that, and then as that has developed, the numbers have gotten more worse. And the other part is, as they made last year's budget, you always have to, not only do you have to project revenues, you have to project expenditures. For example, for elementary and secondary education, they have to project the number of kids that they expect to be in public schools throughout the year, because that's how the schools get their state appropriation. Well, that number was lowballed, as it typically is, and that meant there's the deficit in how much we're going to have to pay the local school districts. And I think that's about $15 million or so. So that's dollars there. They did not put the right number in for the TOPS program. And that meant that number is lower than it's going to be. They did not put the right number in for the number of dollars to pay to local sheriffs for keeping state prisoners. All those are estimates. And all those, again, I'm not saying deliberately, but they are all lower than what they're going to be.
So in terms of the appropriations, those items actually were projected lower.
Yes, they're projected lower, and that means your over appropriations will be lower. So that adds to the fact that you have $750 million of essentially one-time money being spent that you have to make up next year. You have these numbers; they have to be made up during this year, because that's essentially when the payments have to be made. So you end up you have a problem for this year as well, the one we're in. So all those things are happening, and then in the preamble of the bill, you're supposed to have certain efficiencies. That means essentially the legislature told the Division of Administration, the governor's office, find cuts up to this amount, and those have not been found really necessarily. So you have a lot of little things happening suddenly. So this year there's a problem, and then you have the dropping oil prices. So suddenly this year's problem became 750, actually now almost over $900 million. And the issue with dealing with that is the governor comes in January. He has a $900 million shortfall or to make up this year. That's almost impossible to do, because that means you have to cut something, but you don't have much time to cut. And agencies have already spent the money. They've already paid their employees. They've spent the money. You don't have time to raise taxes because you got to get it out. You got to get people paying taxes real fast. That takes time too. It's almost impossible to make up that size of deficit in the current fiscal year, which ends June 30th, 2016, to make that up in 3 months.